A poetic reading of William Wordsworth's poem from the Prelude, Book 1, Childhood and School Time. Reading by Luke Friesen. Was it for this, that one, the fairest of all rivers, loved to blend his murmurs with my nurse's song, and from his alder shades and rocky falls, and from his fords and shallows, sent a voice that flowed along my dreams? For this didst thou, O Derwent, travelling over the green plains, near my sweet birthplace, didst thou, beauteous stream, make ceaseless music through the night and day, which, with its steady cadence tempering our human waywardness, composed my thoughts to more than infant softness, giving me, among the fretful dwellings of mankind, a knowledge, a dim earnest, of calm that nature breathes among the hills and groves, when, having left his mountains to the towers of Cockermouth, that beauteous river came. Behind my father's house he passed, close by, along the margin of our terrace walk. He was a playmate whom we dearly loved. Oh, many a time have I, a 5 years' child, a naked boy in one delightful rill, a little mill race severed from his stream, made one long bathing of a summer's day, basked in the sun, and plunged and basked again, alternate all a summer's day, or coursed over the sandy fields, leaping through groves of yellow groundsel, or when crag and hill, the woods, and distant Skiddaw's lofty height were bronzed with a deep radiance, stood alone beneath the sky, as if I had been born on Indian plains, and from my mother's hut had run abroad in wantonness to sport, a naked savage in the thunder shower. Fair seed time had my soul, and I grew up, fostered alike by beauty and by fear, much favored in my birthplace, and no less in that beloved vale to which ere long I was transplanted. Well I call to mind, 'twas at an early age, ere I had seen 9 summers, when upon the mountain slope the frost and breath of frosty wind had snapped the last autumnal crocus. 'Twas my joy to wander half the night among the cliffs and the smooth hollows where the woodcocks ran along the open turf, in thought and wish, that time my shoulder all with springes hung, I was a fell destroyer on the heights, scudding away from snare and to snare. I plied my anxious visitation, hurrying on, still hurrying onward. Moon and stars were shining over my head. I was alone, and seemed to be a trouble to the peace that was among them. Sometimes it befell in these night wanderings that a strong desire overpowered my better reason, and the bird which was captive of another's toils became my prey. And when the deed was done, I heard among the solitary hills low breathings coming after me, and sounds of undistinguishable motion, steps, amongst almost as silent as the turf they trod, nor less in springtime, when on northern banks the shining sun had from his knot of leaves decoyed the primrose flower, and when the vales and woods were warm, was I a plunderer then, in the high places on the lonesome peaks, where among the mountains and the winds the mother bird had built her lodge. Though mean, my object, and inglorious, yet the end was not ignoble. Oh, when I have hung above the raven's nest by knots of grass and half-inch fissures in the slippery rock, but ill-sustained, and almost, as it seemed, suspended by the blast which blew amain, shouldering the naked crag, oh, at that time, while on the perilous ridge I hung alone, with what strange utterance did the loud dry wind blow through my ears? The sky seemed not a sky of earth, and with what motion moved the clouds? The mind of man is framed even like the breath and harmony of music. There is a dark, invisible workmanship that reconciles discordant elements and makes them move in one society. Ah me, that all the terrors, all the miseries, regrets, vexations, lassitudes, that all the thoughts and feelings which have been infused into my mind should ever have made up the calm existence that is mine when I am worthy of myself. Praise to the end. Thanks likewise for the means. But I believe that nature oftentimes, when she would frame a favored being from his earliest dawn of infancy, doth open out the clouds, as at the touch of lightning, seeking him with gentlest visitation, not the less, though haply aiming at the self-same end, does it delight her sometimes to employ severer interventions, ministry more palpable, and so she dealt with me. One evening, surely, I was led by her. I went alone into a shepherd's boat, a skiff that to a willow tree was tied within a rocky cave, its usual home. 'Twas by the shores of Patterdale, a vale, wherein I was a stranger, thither come a schoolboy traveller at the holidays, forth rambled from the village inn alone. No sooner had I sight of this small skiff, discovered thus by unexpected chance, than I unloosed her tether and embarked. The moon was up, the lake was shining clear among the hoary mountains from the shore. I pushed and struck the oars and struck again, in cadence, and my little boat moved on, even like a man who walks with stately step, though bent on speed. It was an act of stealth and troubled pleasure, not without the voice of mountain echoes did my boat move on, leaving behind her still on either side small circles, glittering idly in the moon, until they melted all into one track of sparkling light. A rocky steep arose above the cavern of the willow tree, and now, as suited one who proudly rode with his best skill, I fixed a steady view upon the top of that same craggy ridge, the bound of the horizon, for behind was nothing but the stars and the gray sky. She was an elfin pinnace. Lustily I dipped my oars into the silent lake, and as I rose upon the stroke, my boat went heaving through the water like a swan, when from behind that craggy steep, till then the bound of the horizon, a huge cliff, as if with voluntary power instinct, upreared its head. I struck and struck again, and, growing still in stature, this huge cliff rose up between me and the stars, and still, with measured motion like a living thing, strode after me. With trembling hands I turned, and through the silent water stole my way back to the cavern of the willow tree. There in her mooring place I left my bark, and through the meadows homeward went, with grave and serious thoughts. And after I had seen that spectacle for many days, my brain worked a dim and undetermined sense of unknown modes of being in my thoughts. There was a darkness, call it solitude, or blank desertion, no familiar shapes or hourly objects, images of trees, of sea or sky, no colors of green fields, but huge and mighty forms that do not live. Like living men, moved slowly through the mind by day and were the trouble of my dreams. Wisdom and spirit of the universe, thou soul, thou art, that art the eternity of thought, that givest to forms and images of breath and everlasting motion, not in vain by day or starlight, thus from my first dawn of childhood didst thou intertwine for me the passions that build up our human soul, not with the mean and vulgar works of man, but with high objects, with enduring things, with life and nature, purifying thus the elements of feeling and of thought, and sanctifying by such discipline both pain and fear, until we recognize a grandeur in the beatings of the heart. Nor was this fellowship vouchsafed to me with stinted kindness. In November days, when vapors rolling down the valleys made a lonely scene more lonesome. Among woods, at noon, and at the calm of summer nights, when, by the margin of the trembling lake, beneath the gloomy hills, I homeward went in solitude, with such intercourse was mine. 'Twas mine among the fields, both day and night, and by the waters, all the summer long, and in the frosty season, when the sun was set and visible for many a mile, the cottage windows through the twilight blazed. I heeded not the summons. Happy time it was, indeed, for all of us. To me, it was a time of rapture, clear and loud. The village clock tolled 6. I wheeled about, proud and exulting, like an untired horse that cares not for its home, all shod with steel. We hissed along the polished ice in games, confederate, imitative of the chase, and woodland pleasures, the resounding horn, and the pack loudly bellowing, and the hunting hare. So through the darkness and the cold we flew, and not a voice was idle with din. Meanwhile the precipices rang aloud, lifeless trees and every icy crag tinkling with iron, while the distant hills, into the tumult, sent an alien sound of melancholy not unnoticed, while the stars eastward were sparkling clear, and in the west the orange sky of evening died away. Not seldom from the uproar I retired into a silent bay, or sportively glanced sideway through the tumultuous throng, to crowd across the image of a star that gleamed upon the ice. And sometimes, when we had given our bodies to the wind, and all the shadowy banks on either side came sweeping through the darkness, spinning still the rapid line of motion, then at once have I, reclining back upon my heels, stopped short, yet still the solitary cliffs wheeled by me, even as the earth had rolled with visible motion her diurnal round. Behind me did they stretch in solemn train. Feebler and feebler I stood and watched, till all was quite tranquil as a dreamless sleep. Ye presence of nature in the sky and on the earth, ye visions of the hills and souls of lonely places, can I think a vulgar hope was yours when ye employed such ministry, when ye that through the many a year haunting me thus among my boyish sports of caves and trees, upon the woods and hills, impressed upon all forms, the characters of danger or desire, and thus did make the surface of the universal earth with triumph and delight and hope and fear work like a sea? Not uselessly employed, I might pursue this theme through every change of exercise and play, to which the year did summon us in its delightful round. We were a noisy crew. The sun in heaven beheld not vales more beautiful than ours, nor saw a race in happiness and joy more worthy of the ground where they were sown. I would record with no reluctant voice the woods of autumn and their hazel bowers, with milk-white clusters hung, the broad and line, true symbol of the foolishness of hope, which, with its strong enchantment, led us on by rocks and pools, shut out from every star, all the green summer to forlorn cascades, among the windings of the mountain brooks, unfaded recollections at this hour. The heart is almost mine with which I felt from some hilltop on sunny afternoons, the kite high among the fleecy clouds, pull at its rein like an impatient courser, or from the meadows, sent on gusty days, beheld her breast the wind, then suddenly dashed headlong and rejected by the storm. Ye lowly cottages in which we dwelt, a ministration of your own was yours, a sanctity, a safeguard, and a love. Can I forget you, being as ye were, so beautiful among the pleasant fields in which ye stood? Or can I here forget the plain and seemly countenance with which ye dealt out your plain comforts? Yet had ye delights and exaltations of your own. Eager and never weary, we pursued our home amusements by the warm peat fire. At evening, when with pencil and with slate, in square divisions parceled out and all, with crosses and with ciphers scribbled over, we schemed and puzzled, head opposed to head, in strife too humble to be named in verse. Around the naked table, snow-white deal, cherry or maple, sate in close array, and to the combat, lo, our wits led on, thick-ribbed army, not as in the world, neglected and ungratefully thrown by even for the very service they had wrought, but husbanded through many a long campaign. Uncouth assemblage was it, where no few had changed their functions, some plebeian cards, which fate, beyond the promise of their birth, had glorified, and called to represent the persons of deported potentates. Oh, with what echoes on the board they fell! Ironic diamonds, clubs, hearts, diamonds, spades, a congregation piteously akin. Cheap matter did they give to boyish wit. Those sooty knaves precipitated down with scoffs and taunts like Vulcan out of heaven. The paramount ace, a moon in her eclipse, queens gleaming through their splendor's decay, and monarchs surly as at the works sustained by royal visages. Meanwhile abroad, the heavy rain was fallen, or the frost raged bitterly with keen and silent tooth, and interrupting oft the impassioned game, from Esthwaite's neighboring lake, the splitting ice, while it sank down toward the water, sent among the meadows and the hills its long and dismal yellings, like the noise of wolves when they are howling round the Bothnic main. Nor, sedulous as I had been to trace how nature by an extrinsic passion first peopled my mind with beauteous forms, or grand, and made me love them, may I well forget how other pleasures have been mine, of subtler joy origin, how I have felt, not seldom, even in that tempestuous time, those hallowed and pure motions of the sense, which seem in their simplicity to own an intellectual charm, that calm delight, which, if I err not, surely must belong to those first-born affinities that fit our new existence to existing things, and in our dawn of being constitute the bond of union betwixt life and joy. Yes, I remember when the changeful earth and twice 5 seasons on my mind had stamped the faces of the moving year. Even then, a child, I held unconscious intercourse with the eternal beauty, drinking in a pure organic pleasure from the lines of curling mist, or from the level plain of waters colored by the steady clouds, the sands of Westmoreland, the creeks and bays of Crumbria's rocky limits. They can tell how, when the sea threw off its evening shade, and to the shepherds' huts beneath the crags did send sweet notice of the rising moon, now I have stood to fancies as these, engrafted in the tenderness of thought, a stranger linking with the spectacle, no conscious memory of a kindred sight, and bringing with me no peculiar sense of quietness or peace. Yet I have stood, even while mine eye has moved o'er 3 long leagues of shining water, gathering, as it seemed, through every hair breadth of that field of light, new pleasure, like a bee among the flowers. Thus, often in those fits of vulgar joy, which through all seasons on a child's pursuits are prompt attendants, mid that giddy bliss, which, like a tempest, works along the blood, and is forgotten, even then I felt gleams like the flashing of a shield. The earth and common face of nature spake to me rememberable things, sometimes, 'tis true, by chance collisions and quaint accidents, like those ill-sorted unions, works supposed of evil-minded fairies, yet not vain nor profitless, if haply they impressed collateral objects and appearances, albeit lifeless then, and doomed to sleep until maturer seasons called them forth to impregnate and elevate the mind. And if the vulgar joy by its own weight wearied itself out of the memory, the scenes which were a witness of that joy remained in their substantial lineaments, depicted on the brain, and to the eye were visible a daily sight. And thus, by the impressive disciple of fear, by pleasure and repeated happiness, so frequently repeated, and by force of obscure feelings representative of joys that were forgotten, these same scenes, so beauteous and majestic in themselves, though yet the day was distant, did at length become habitually dear, and all those hues and forms were by invisible links allied to the affections. I began my story early, feeling, as I fear, the weakness of a human love for days disowned by memory ere the birth of spring, planting my snowdrops among winter snows, Nor will it seem to thee, my friend, so prompt in sympathy, that I have lengthened out, with fond and feeble tongue, a tedious tale. Meanwhile, my hope has been that I might fetch invigorating thoughts from former years, might fix the wavering balance of my mind, and happily meet reproaches too, whose power may spur me on, in manhood now mature, to honorable toil. Yet should these hopes be vain, and thus neither I be taught to understand myself, nor thou to know, with better knowledge, how the heart was framed. Of him thou lovest, need I dread from thee harsh judgments, if I am so loth to quit those recollected hours that have the charm of visionary things, and lovely forms, and sweet sensations that throw back our life, and almost make our infancy itself a visible scene on which the sun is shining. One end hereby, at least, hath been attained. My mind hath been revived. And if this mood desert me not, I will forthwith bring down, through later years, the story of my life. The road lies plain before me. 'Tis a theme, single, and of determined bounds, and hence I choose it rather at this time than work of ampler or more varied argument. So ends that excerpt. Given that it is titled From the Prelude, Book 1, I imagine that he made good on his last words of this section and continued to write about his life and thoughts from times after childhood and school time. We can take note of some of the old English words, some of the names that are completely unfamiliar to me. I have not looked up the names of such rivers, creeks, locations, hills, lakes with ice cracking. I did look up some of the Old English words to give myself a sense of what these were meaning, like lassitudes, even if I don't quite remember the exact meaning to put it into words right now. It was in the back of my mind. And that is my favorite thing about this writing. The way that things develop in the back of our mind, develop in our brain, in our heart, from these experiences, and even things that we've forgotten. Develop us, develop our senses, develop the way that we see things now, and fit together this existence to existing things. The words that I do also want to note of a boy on Indian plains, from my mother's hut, a naked savage to sport. We tend not to use words like savage these days out of respect for the wonderful human beings that were colonized by ancestors like my own, and continue to feel those effects, and I continue to feel those effects. And so to use such a word now, I feel deeply is disrespectful, and I would not choose to. But in this case, I felt, rather than changing anything in the author's words, I didn't put the time and effort into trying to find substitute there, and did not want to get carried away in substituting anything else, such as taking some of the names of things and putting them to my own homeland and thinking of my home. But we can take Savage here, I hope, with a grain of salt, knowing that this man wrote in his own time, from his own perspective, and from his own ignorance, and meant the word in his own way. But And even here, in such a case, being able to take, well, not take, learn from those folk, those neighbors, those host communities that live in places here like Canada, indigenous folks to Turtle Island, and to learn from them to run abroad in wantonness to sport, running naked in a thunder shower. Not that that is something to look down on, but to look at that as something to celebrate. Perhaps I have probably put more words than I had worth to contribute here to this subject. But I wanted to try, I suppose, to assuage concerns. I will also relate that I have been reading this poem bit by bit about 3 times over during the past month or 2 or 3. And before falling asleep, let it sink deep into my subconscious and then read again with barely any memory and not even understanding the first few times a lot of these words, what he was actually speaking about, the subject of, the object, the flow, the objective, and then gaining new insight to these things every time. And so just really enjoying this experience and wanting to share it, but also wanting to see if I could read this entire thing in one go, in one recording like this, has a breathing exercise, because right now, this morning, I have had such a terrible flare-up of IBS symptoms that I am confined to my couch, wrapped in blankets for a chill, with my head on pillows. Here, I will even show you. Yeah. I'm on my couch. This is how I've been reading it. Yeah. And just wanted to sort of, share this experience and see if I could create something that might be worth sharing. And whether or not this is really great for sharing is, I think it's listenable, maybe, is what I'll suspect from this vantage point already. And thank you for coming along on this journey. I did reach a point about halfway through where I almost felt like, for lack of breath, I might even start passing out. But I have a really hard time passing out, to be honest. And though my nerves got tingly, and even like the top and back of my skull felt a bit of that during that time, I just continued to breathe and let my brain and my words, my breath, catch up to where my breath could then facilitate the continuing of speaking. And I feel like this was a successful experiment, and so I'm happy, very happy.